Chapter 13 is the endocrine system. We review from A&P1. Know that endocrine glands, which is what is covered in this chapter, they secrete their hormones into blood vessels, sometimes into lymph vessels, versus exocrine glands, not covered in this chapter, they use ducts instead. Endocrine system is precise. Know what this means. Here, only target cells can respond to a specific hormone. That's because the target cells contain receptors for the hormone, but these receptors are not present on other cells. So, just as an example, the hormone called TSH, pretend that this triangular shape is the hormone. TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. This hormone only acts on the thyroid. And so on the thyroid cells would be the receptor where this hormone attaches. And so here, only the thyroid cells contain the receptors for the thyroid stimulating hormone, but our other organ cells do not. And so here in this chapter, we're going to cover the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, adrenal glands, pancreas, and at the end, some other glands as well. Know that there are two types of hormones. There are the steroid or the steroid-like hormones. So if you remember, steroids are a type of lipids, and so these contain rings of carbons and hydrogens. These steroid hormones are produced from cholesterol. The different examples that we'll go over in this chapter are testosterone, estrogen, but also the adrenal gland hormones such as cortisol, aldosterone. While these steroid hormones are hydrophobic, and so they require these special protein carriers to move them in our bloodstream. Versus non-steroid hormones, these are protein-based, and so they're made up of amino acids if they are protein-based, and they're hydrophilic instead. The way hormones work is that they may change enzyme activity, they can increase or decrease the transport of a substance, they can also lead to protein synthesis. While also they bind to the receptors, these receptors can either be on the surface of the cell or inside the target cell. Number of receptors can be regulated to change. Let's say if the hormone level is high or low. And so this is a way of homeostasis. Know that upregulation means increasing the number of receptors if hormone level has decreased in response to hormone level decreasing. Versus downregulation. So now this is the opposite. This would be decreasing the number of receptors if, let's say, the hormone level increased, if the gland released too much of the hormone. Well, so now you can just decrease the receptor level to maintain that homeostasis. Here, this shows that steroid, but also thyroid hormones, they're able to enter the cell and cause protein synthesis. They can enter the cell because they're hydrophobic, and so they can squeeze in between the phospholipids of the cell membrane. So when they go to the nucleus, you can see in this picture, and they can activate transcription and translation. Versus non-steroid hormones, or the protein-based ones, these are not able to enter the cell. These instead bind to receptors on the cell surfaces. And so here the circular shape is the hormone. It is attaching to the receptor but not going into the cell. So then these other proteins may get activated. So this protein adenylate cyclase leads to the production of cyclic AMP, and cAMP or cyclic AMP then can activate other proteins, which can then lead to changes inside this target cell. Prostaglandins are not quite like hormones, but they're hormone-like substances. They're paracrine, meaning they act locally. So here we'll underline hormone-like substances. They're made by all cells that have a nucleus. Now these can activate or inhibit adenylate cyclase. Therefore, they can control cyclic AMP production. And so their action can then control smooth muscle activity, lead to vasodilation, change immune response, and cause uterine contractions. Some athletes have abused hormones to improve their athletic performance. Steroids can be taken to increase muscular strength. But so what happens is taking steroids can actually lead to decreasing natural testosterone production in men. It can lead to stunting growth, breast development in males, male sexual characteristics in females, but also damage to organs, such as damage to kidneys, liver, hearts, and an increase in cholesterol, but also psychiatric behavioral problems. Growth hormone. So this can be taken to increase enlarged muscles. Some use it instead of or along with steroids, but taking too much of the growth hormone, if our body doesn't need it, it can also lead to problems. Erythropoietin. This is used to increase number of red blood cells and oxygen delivery. This is easier than blood doping. Blood doping refers to, for example, getting transfusions or using a chemical that increases the oxygen carrying capacity. But yeah, erythropoietin is easier to take than those options. But again, this can lead to problems such as heart attack and death. Okay, next part. Before we go into the different types of hormones, the glands that make them, we need to go over this negative feedback mechanism. So this is a way for the body to maintain homeostasis. So if, let's say, a gland is releasing too much of a hormone, something has gone wrong, it's made too much of a hormone, what happens is that this hormone then goes and tells the gland or the glands that helped make it to stop making anymore. So on the left side, let me explain this a little bit better. So here's just an example. It kind of has to do with this negative feedback. Let's say you set the thermostat at a certain temperature. Let's say it's cold out. And so if the temperature goes below that temperature, what it was set to, then the furnace kicks on and the heat is released. Well, so when the heat is released, then it negatively turns feedback mechanisms and turns off the thermostat. So here, what this is saying is that on the right side, it shows that too much of a hormone can then go, and that's what this dotted line is supposed to represent. Here, the hormone inhibits the gland that helps to release the hormone. And so we're going to see this with the hormones that we're going to talk about. And so for now, for this negative feedback mechanism, know that hormones inhibit glands that make them or help make them. We're going to start with the pituitary gland. And so we're going to see that the pituitary gland is controlled by the hypothalamus. Pituitary gland has two parts to it, two lobes. Anterior part of the pituitary, it's regulated by the hypothalamus because here the hypothalamus sends special hormones called releasing hormones to the anterior pituitary. And so these special hormones are then going to activate the anterior pituitary to release its own hormones. These hormones are sent over using the blood vessels in between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, called the hypophyseal portal system. Okay, so again, these are just blood vessels between hypothalamus and anterior pituitary. Which we see on the picture at the bottom, the one on the left. And so here, these red and blue lines, they're representing those blood vessels, the hypophyseal portal system, where the hormones coming from the hypothalamus are then transported down to the anterior pituitary. So only if these releasing hormones go to the anterior pituitary, then the anterior pituitary can release its own hormones. Versus then the posterior lobe. Posterior lobe regulation is done through nerve impulses instead. So here instead we have long neurons that extend from the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary. Now the posterior pituitary does not make its own hormones, but really the posterior pituitary ends up being the destination for these neurons' axons through which the hormones get released. So just to explain this a little bit more, I'm going to make a drawing on the next slide. Let's pretend here the upper part is the hypothalamus, the bottom is the pituitary gland. Going down to the anterior pituitary are the blood vessels that carry over the releasing hormone. So there are different types of releasing hormones for the different hormones that are going to be released by the anterior pituitary. Versus for the posterior pituitary, here instead, long neurons extend down to the posterior pituitary. And so it's these neurons that are releasing the hormones. There are two types of neurons. One of these neuron types releases oxytocin, and the other neuron releases ADH. Okay, so once again, posterior pituitary does not make hormones. It only serves as the port through which these hypothalamic neurons release their hormones. And so here this picture is kind of going through the negative feedback mechanism. It's saying that, hey, hormones can inhibit the glands that make them, directly make them, or help to make them. Don't worry about this picture, but this is talking about the different releasing hormones that are sent down from the hypothalamus down to the anterior pituitary. And so, for example, GHRH, this releasing hormone would have to come down from the hypothalamus down to the anterior pituitary for the anterior pituitary to be able to release its growth hormone. Versus somatostatin, so this is an inhibiting hormone. This would go down from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary to stop the release of the growth hormone. So yeah, there's these other examples here.